For as long as anyone could remember, humanity had wondered the same question. Were they alone in the universe? Scientists searched the skies. Writers imagined strange civilizations. Movies and books painted pictures of peaceful meetings and terrible wars. But no matter how much people dreamed about it, nobody truly knew what waited beyond the stars. Then one ordinary morning, everything changed. It started with a message from observatories around the world. Powerful telescopes had detected something unusual moving toward the solar system. At first, experts believed it was a group of comets or perhaps a strange natural event. But as more information arrived, the truth became impossible to ignore. These objects were not natural. They were ships. Not one or two, but thousands. Huge vessels, larger than anything humanity had ever built, were approaching from deep space. Within hours, governments declared emergencies. News channels interrupted their regular programs. Social media exploded with rumors and theories. Millions of people stayed glued to their phones and televisions, desperate for answers. Nobody knew whether the visitors came as friends or enemies. Military forces around the world were placed on high alert. Satellites tracked the fleet every second. Scientists worked without sleep, trying to understand what humanity was facing. For the first time in history, every nation on Earth shared the same fear. Humanity was no longer alone. People reacted in different ways. Some were terrified. Others were excited. Many simply couldn't believe what they were seeing. Churches, mosques, temples, and other places of worship became crowded. Families gathered together. Schools closed in several countries. Stock markets shook with uncertainty. Every conversation seemed to revolve around one thing: the visitors. As days passed, the fleet slowed down and stopped near the outer edge of the solar system. Then came the message. To the surprise of everyone, the signal was easy to understand. Somehow, the senders had already studied Earth's languages. Their transmission was translated into hundreds of languages almost instantly. The message was short. People of Earth, rejoice. You have been discovered by the eternal Galactic Empire. Prepare yourselves for your official welcome into civilized existence. The word sent chills through billions of people. The eternal Galactic Empire. The name sounded powerful, ancient, almost impossible to imagine. According to the message, the Empire had ruled countless worlds for millions of years. They claimed to be the oldest and greatest civilization in the galaxy. And now they had come to Earth. Some people celebrated. They believed humanity was entering a new age. Others feared the message sounded less like a greeting and more like a warning. Still, no attacks came. No cities were destroyed. No weapons were fired. Instead, the fleet simply waited. Soon, another message arrived. Representatives of the Empire wished to meet humanity's leaders. An international team of diplomats, scientists, engineers, historians, and translators was assembled. For the first time in history, countries that often disagreed worked side by side. Political differences suddenly seemed much smaller compared to what stood beyond the stars. The entire world watched. When the meeting finally happened, billions tuned in. The alien delegation arrived aboard a giant vessel that entered orbit around Earth. Smaller ships carried the representatives down to a secure location prepared months earlier. People expected terrifying creatures, unlike anything they had ever seen. Instead, the visitors were strange but not frightening. They wore elaborate clothing decorated with jewels and symbols. Their movements were slow and careful, almost theatrical. Every step appeared rehearsed. Most surprising of all, they behaved as though they were attending a royal ceremony. Before speaking, they spent nearly 20 minutes performing greetings and reciting titles. One representative introduced himself with such a long list of honors that translators struggled to keep up. Many people watching the broadcast assumed this was normal for advanced civilizations. After all, these beings ruled the galaxy. Or so everyone believed. The meeting itself remained polite. The imperial representatives spoke proudly about their history. They described great victories, ancient traditions, and thousands upon thousands of worlds under their authority. They referred to humanity as young beings, and often spoke as though Earth had just joined an exclusive club. Human diplomats listened carefully. Scientists listened even more carefully. Something felt strange. Very strange. The Empire talked endlessly about tradition. They talked about ceremonies. They talked about rules created hundreds of thousands of years earlier. They talked about noble families and ancient customs. But strangely, they barely discussed science. Whenever Earth's experts asked questions about their technology, the answers became surprisingly vague. Instead of explaining how their systems worked, imperial officials often responded with phrases like, "These sacred designs have served faithfully for ages," or "The wisdom of our ancestors requires no improvement." Some scientists exchanged confused looks. That answer seemed unusual. Humanity had advanced because people constantly improved things. Every generation built upon the discoveries of the last. Progress never stopped. Yet these visitors seemed almost proud that nothing had changed. Still, nobody wanted to jump to conclusions. Perhaps this was simply a cultural difference. Over the following weeks, cooperation continued. Alien engineers shared limited information. Human researchers studied every detail they could find. At first, everyone expected to discover technology far beyond human understanding. And in some areas that was true. Their ships were enormous. Their materials were incredibly durable. Their knowledge of distant stars was astonishing. But other discoveries left researchers scratching their heads. Some systems seemed oddly inefficient. Certain machines required huge amounts of energy for tasks humans solved in simpler ways. Instructions were written in ancient formats that nobody had updated in thousands of years. Several experts assumed translation errors were responsible. Surely a civilization millions of years old couldn't make such basic mistakes. But the strange discoveries continued. One engineering team found that an important system aboard an imperial ship relied on procedures so complicated that modern human software could perform the same job much faster. Another group noticed that maintenance manuals contained unnecessary steps repeated dozens of times. An experienced technician joked that the instructions looked as if nobody had edited them since the age of dinosaurs. People laughed. At least they thought it was a joke. Then they learned it wasn't. The manuals really hadn't changed for an unbelievably long time. News of these discoveries remained secret at first. World leaders wanted to avoid misunderstandings. After all, the Empire still possessed enormous fleets and unknown capabilities. No one wanted to offend beings who claimed to control the galaxy. But among scientists and engineers, curiosity was growing. Questions began spreading. Had the Empire stopped innovating? Had they become trapped by their own traditions? Was it possible that a civilization could survive for millions of years without truly changing? Meanwhile, ordinary citizens around Earth continued following every update. People bought books about astronomy. Universities reported increased interest in science programs. Children dreamed about becoming astronauts. Artists painted scenes of humanity's future among the stars. The arrival of alien life had united people in ways nobody expected. Yet beneath the excitement, something else was slowly emerging. Confusion. The Galactic Empire seemed ancient and powerful, but the more humanity learned, the more unusual they appeared. Their officials insisted on complicated ceremonies before discussing simple matters. Meetings often lasted hours because of traditions nobody understood. Some imperial representatives seemed shocked when humans offered suggestions. One diplomat reportedly looked horrified after being asked if an old procedure could be simplified. To the alien official, changing traditions was almost unthinkable. To humans, improving things was natural. Neither side fully understood the other. Still, relations remained peaceful. Human leaders believed patience was important. Perhaps these differences were simply misunderstandings. Perhaps deeper cooperation would reveal the greatness everyone expected. But privately, many researchers were beginning to suspect something nobody had imagined when the fleet first appeared. The eternal galactic empire might not be the unstoppable force it claimed to be. And if that suspicion proved true, humanity's first contact with alien life was about to become far stranger than anyone had ever expected. Because somewhere beneath the endless titles, the elaborate ceremonies, and the overwhelming confidence, the people of Earth were starting to notice tiny cracks hidden behind the Empire's glorious image. And those cracks would soon reveal a truth that would leave the entire world staring in disbelief. As cooperation between Earth and the eternal galactic empire continued, the fear that had once gripped humanity slowly began to fade. People still respected the Empire's enormous fleet. No one doubted that these ancient beings possessed incredible resources. But among scientists, engineers, and researchers, another feeling was beginning to grow. Curiosity. The more information they received, the more questions appeared. At first, experts assumed they simply lacked enough knowledge to understand alien systems. After all, they were dealing with a civilization millions of years older than humanity. Naturally, their technology should have been far beyond human understanding. Yet something strange kept happening. Human researchers would examine a complicated imperial device, expecting to spend months studying it, only to discover that the machine was solving a simple problem in an unnecessarily difficult way. One team studying an energy distribution system was completely shocked. The device worked. In fact, it worked very well. But it contained hundreds of components that served almost no purpose. Several human engineers spent an entire week trying to understand why these parts existed. Eventually, they reached an unbelievable conclusion. They weren't necessary at all. Those parts had been added over countless generations because no one in the Empire wanted to remove anything designed by their ancestors. Nobody had dared to simplify the system. The researchers thought they had made a mistake. Surely this couldn't be true. But after checking everything repeatedly, the answer remained the same. Thousands of years of additions had turned simple machines into giant puzzles. When they shared their findings with imperial officials, the aliens appeared confused. One representative calmly explained that changing the original design would dishonor traditions that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. The humans sitting in the room were speechless. Back on Earth, innovation had always been celebrated. People improved phones every year. Cars changed constantly. Computers became faster and smaller. Even household appliances evolved. Nobody would refuse an improvement simply because an older version had existed for a long time. Yet that seemed to be exactly how the Empire operated. The discovery sparked endless debates among experts. Could a civilization become trapped by its own success? Had the Empire grown so large and powerful that it stopped trying to improve? As more studies were completed, the strange pattern became impossible to ignore. Ancient systems were everywhere. Communication networks relied on procedures that human software developers considered inefficient. Navigation systems contained layers of instructions written in languages that many imperial citizens themselves barely understood. Even simple maintenance tasks required endless paperwork and ceremonies. One human technician jokingly compared the empire to an old house, where generations kept adding rooms without ever repairing the foundation. The comparison spread quickly among researchers. And the strangest part, the empire seemed proud of it. To them, age meant perfection. If something had survived for 1,000,000 years, then it must be flawless. Questioning old methods was seen as disrespectful. Humanity, however, viewed things differently. Progress came from questioning everything. No idea was sacred. No design was untouchable. If something could be improved, people improved it. This difference fascinated sociologists around the world. Many experts realized that humanity's greatest advantage had never been age. It had been flexibility. Humans adapted. Humans experimented. Humans made mistakes and learned from them. The empire, on the other hand, seemed frozen in time. Weeks turned into months. Joint research projects expanded. More and more imperial technology was studied. And with every discovery, human experts became increasingly amazed. Not because the empire was superior, but because it wasn't. At least, not in the way everyone had expected. Their ships were gigantic, but many systems inside them wasted huge amounts of energy. Their computers possessed incredible storage capacity, yet some programs ran slower than software designed by university students. Their medical equipment was advanced, but several procedures took hours when modern human methods could accomplish the same results much faster. The findings seemed impossible. How could rulers of the galaxy overlook such obvious things? The answer became clearer over time. They had stopped asking questions. Their ancestors had created marvelous technologies long ago. Generation after generation had simply preserved them. Innovation had slowly disappeared. Nobody wanted to challenge tradition. Nobody wanted to risk making mistakes. And eventually, curiosity itself had become rare. Human researchers found this idea almost frightening, because they realized it could happen to anyone. Success could become a trap. Comfort could become weakness. Meanwhile, ordinary people across Earth began hearing rumors. Official reports remained classified, but information always found a way to spread. Online discussions exploded. People joked that humanity had expected space wizards and discovered cosmic librarians instead. Others refused to believe the rumors. Many insisted that the empire was simply hiding its true capabilities. Surely beings millions of years old couldn't be so inefficient. But then came the educational exchange programs. For the first time, imperial scholars and human scientists worked side by side. And that's when things became truly interesting. Human researchers quickly noticed that many alien scholars possessed incredible memories. They could recite historical events from hundreds of thousands of years ago. They knew countless traditions and regulations. But when presented with new problems, many struggled. Not because they lacked intelligence. Far from it. They had simply spent their lives memorizing ancient knowledge instead of creating new ideas. One experiment surprised everyone. Human and imperial teams were given the same engineering challenge. The aliens immediately searched old records for approved solutions. The humans started brainstorming. Within hours, the human team produced several creative approaches. The alien team spent most of their time debating which ancient procedure should be followed. The result left both sides stunned. Humanity's solution was faster, simpler, and more efficient. Nobody had expected that outcome, least of all the Empire. Some imperial scholars reacted with disbelief. Others became curious. A few even admitted they had never been encouraged to think that way before. For the first time in their lives, they experienced something unusual. Freedom. The freedom to question. The freedom to experiment. The freedom to fail. Back on Earth, these stories inspired millions. Schools emphasized creativity more than ever. Children dreamed not only of reaching the stars, but of helping shape the future. Scientists who had once feared alien superiority now felt something else. Excitement. Because they realized humanity had something valuable to offer. Not larger fleets, not ancient empires, but fresh ideas. Still, nobody underestimated the Empire. Its resources were enormous. Its territories stretched across countless worlds. And there was much humanity still didn't understand. But the image of an unstoppable civilization had begun to crack. Slowly, carefully, governments prepared reports for world leaders. The conclusions were astonishing. The Galactic Empire was powerful, very powerful, but it was also deeply stagnant. Its greatest strength had become its greatest weakness. Tradition. And nowhere was that weakness more obvious than in the military. Human analysts studying historical records noticed something unexpected. Imperial battle strategies had barely changed over thousands of years. Entire campaigns followed rigid patterns. Commanders obeyed ancient doctrines without question. Flexibility was rare. Creativity was discouraged. One military historian reportedly laughed out loud while reading certain records. Not because they were weak, but because they were predictable. And predictability, humans knew, could be dangerous. The report remained secret. World leaders agreed that mocking the Empire would be foolish. Maintaining peaceful relations remained the priority. But privately, many experts couldn't help feeling amazed. Humanity had spent decades imagining alien civilizations as perfect beings. Wise, all-knowing, far beyond human limitations. Reality turned out to be very different. These aliens had fears, biases, pride, bad habits, and perhaps most surprisingly of all, they made mistakes. Just like humans. That realization changed everything. For the first time since the arrival of the fleet, people stopped looking at the Empire with fear. They began looking at them as fellow beings. Different, certainly. Older, absolutely. But not gods. Not masters. Just another civilization. And among younger imperial scholars, something unexpected was beginning to happen. Many had grown fascinated by humanity. They admired Earth's creativity, its music, its humor, its willingness to challenge old ideas. Some secretly began studying human history. Others started questioning traditions that had existed for ages. The changes were small, almost invisible, but they had already begun. Neither side realized it yet. But history was quietly turning. Because while humanity was discovering the truth about the Galactic Empire, the Galactic Empire was also discovering the truth about humanity. And for some of its citizens, that discovery was far more shocking. Because among all the countless worlds they had ruled, they had never encountered a species that treated ancient traditions with such fearless curiosity, or a species that could laugh at problems instead of bowing before them. And soon, That strange human habit would create a level of embarrassment the mighty empire had never experienced in its entire history. By the beginning of the second year after first contact, fear had almost completely disappeared from daily life on Earth. People still respected the eternal galactic empire. Nobody forgot that it controlled countless worlds and possessed fleets larger than anything humanity could imagine. But something had changed. The mysterious rulers of the galaxy no longer felt untouchable, and the empire itself seemed completely unaware of this. Imperial leaders still believed humanity viewed them with awe and unquestioning admiration. In their minds, Earth was simply another young civilization that would eventually accept the Empire's traditions and authority. They couldn't have been more wrong. Humanity had been studying them carefully. And with each passing month, people became less intimidated and more curious. Unfortunately for the Empire, curiosity often led to unexpected discoveries. And some of those discoveries were impossible to keep secret forever. One event in particular changed everything. The Empire announced a grand demonstration of its military power. The ceremony would be broadcast throughout the galaxy and across Earth. Imperial officials described it as a historic moment. According to them, humanity would finally witness the unmatched greatness of the eternal galactic empire. News channels covered the event for weeks. People everywhere tuned in. Children skipped homework. Restaurants installed giant screens. Entire cities held public viewings. Everyone expected something breathtaking. And at first, it certainly looked impressive. Thousands of massive warships appeared in perfect formation. Gigantic carriers moved through space like floating mountains. The sight alone left many viewers speechless. Imperial announcers proudly explained every movement. Everything was proceeding according to ancient traditions that had remained unchanged for nearly 500,000 years. And then something unexpected happened. A young human aerospace engineer, watching the broadcast, noticed something strange. The formation patterns looked oddly inefficient. Out of curiosity, she and several colleagues ran simulations. The results shocked them. The Empire's famous battle formations left large blind spots and wasted enormous amounts of energy. Even worse, several ships blocked one another's firing lines. The engineers checked the calculations again. And again. And again. The answer never changed. Their formations were beautiful. But from a practical standpoint, they made very little sense. The findings were quietly shared among experts. Soon military analysts reached the same conclusion. The Empire's formations had originally been designed thousands of years ago, when technology was completely different. But because traditions were considered sacred, nobody had updated them. The strategy had survived. Not because it was perfect, but because nobody dared question it. Eventually, someone leaked the information. Within hours, the internet exploded. Animated videos appeared showing simplified versions of the formations. Science channels explained the flaws. Military historians discussed ancient doctrines. People began making harmless jokes. Nothing cruel. Nothing hateful. Just ordinary human humor. Memes spread everywhere. Artists created cartoons. Late-night shows discussed the strange discoveries. For many humans, the situation was simply unbelievable. They had expected galaxy-conquering geniuses. Instead, they found ancient traditions nobody had bothered to improve. To the surprise of many experts, the jokes didn't come from arrogance. Most people genuinely found the situation fascinating and funny. Humor had always been one of humanity's ways of dealing with uncertainty. People laughed during difficult times. They laughed at themselves. And now, They laughed at the strange habits of their new galactic neighbors. Unfortunately, the Empire didn't understand humor at all. Imperial officials were horrified. Some assumed humanity was preparing an insult. Others feared Earth had gone insane. Several nobles demanded apologies. They simply couldn't understand why anyone would laugh. To them, laughter during official matters was disrespectful. On Earth, the reaction was completely different. People couldn't understand why the Empire was so offended. No one hated them. Nobody wanted war. People were simply amused. The misunderstanding became even worse during diplomatic meetings. One imperial official spent nearly 40 minutes reciting ceremonial titles before discussing a trade agreement. A human representative accidentally smiled. Not out of disrespect. He simply found the situation absurd. The smile was noticed immediately. The alien delegation became deeply offended. For days, newspapers across the Empire discussed the incident. Meanwhile, people on Earth couldn't stop talking about it. Comedians recreated the event. Online videos exaggerated the endless titles. Some creators jokingly competed to invent the longest introductions possible. Millions laughed. The Empire was shocked. Never in their history had another civilization reacted this way. Fear. Yes. Submission. Countless times. Rebellion. Occasionally. But laughter. Never. They didn't know how to respond. Things became even more embarrassing during scientific exchanges. An Imperial research vessel experienced a problem with one of its energy systems. The malfunction wasn't dangerous, but repairs would normally require weeks. Human engineers offered assistance. The Imperial crew reluctantly agreed. To everyone's surprise, the humans solved the issue in less than 6 hours. At first, alien officials refused to believe it. They assumed something had been done incorrectly. But after repeated tests, the system worked perfectly. The human solution required fewer components, consumed less energy, and was easier to maintain. The news spread rapidly. Young scholars across the Empire were amazed. Some became curious about human methods. Others were embarrassed. And a few were angry. Not because humanity had insulted them, but because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. For thousands of years, they had believed their civilization represented perfection. Now a species that had barely begun exploring space was finding solutions their greatest minds had overlooked. The situation grew stranger by the month. Human universities started receiving requests from alien students. At first only a few applied. Then hundreds. Soon thousands. Many wanted to study creativity, engineering, and problem-solving. Earth's educational institutions welcomed them. The interactions produced unexpected results. Alien students discovered music festivals, board games, movies, sports, and perhaps most confusing of all, internet humor. They didn't understand it. At least not at first. Human jokes made no sense to them. Why laugh at mistakes? Why make fun of everyday problems? Why create funny pictures about serious topics? But over time, some began to appreciate it. They noticed something important. Humans didn't laugh because they were cruel. They laughed because it helped them cope. Humor made difficult situations easier. It brought people together. And perhaps most surprisingly, humans often laughed at themselves more than anyone else. This confused many imperial visitors. Their own society valued dignity above everything. Embarrassment was shameful. Failure was hidden. Mistakes were rarely discussed. Humans seemed completely different. They admitted mistakes. They argued. They experimented. Sometimes they failed. And then they laughed and tried again. To many young aliens, this way of thinking felt strangely liberating. Back within the Empire, however, older leaders were becoming increasingly concerned. Reports about humanity disturbed them. Young citizens were asking questions. Ancient traditions were being debated. Scholars were proposing reforms. Some military officers even suggested updating battle doctrines. Such ideas had once been unthinkable, and many nobles blamed Earth. But secretly, some leaders understood the truth. Humanity wasn't causing these problems. Humanity was exposing them. The cracks had already existed. Earth had simply shined a light on them. One senior advisor, reportedly, made a troubling observation during a private meeting. He warned that the greatest danger facing the Empire was not human weapons. It was human ideas. Ideas that encouraged curiosity. Ideas that welcomed change. Ideas that refused to worship the past. His warning spread among the highest levels of government. Some dismissed it. Others became deeply worried. Meanwhile, life on Earth remained peaceful. People enjoyed meeting alien visitors. Businesses opened restaurants designed for different species. Tourism expanded. Cultural exchanges became common. Children grew up seeing beings from distant stars as something normal. And everywhere humor continued. Not hateful humor. Not mocking with cruelty. But the kind of laughter that humans had always shared. The kind that reminded people not to take themselves too seriously. Ironically, that simple habit turned out to be something the Empire had forgotten long ago. For millions of years, they had treated themselves as the center of civilization. They had built legends around their greatness. They had convinced themselves that perfection had already been achieved. And now, a young species from a small blue planet had done something no enemy had ever accomplished. Not with armies, not with weapons, not with threats, but with smiles. Because every joke, every question, and every simple improvement forced the Empire to face a painful possibility. Perhaps they were not the wise masters they believed themselves to be. Perhaps they had spent so long preserving the past that they had forgotten how to build the future. And while Earth laughed and carried on with daily life, deep inside the endless worlds of the Galactic Empire, doubt was beginning to spread. Quietly, slowly, but relentlessly. And before long, that doubt would grow into something far more dangerous than embarrassment. It would become a crisis powerful enough to shake the oldest empire in the galaxy. No one on Earth expected to become the center of a crisis that stretched across the galaxy. People were busy with their normal lives. Students worried about exams. Parents took children to school. Workers rushed through traffic. Sports fans argued over games. Humanity had not set out to challenge the eternal galactic empire. In fact, most people still viewed First Contact as one of the greatest events in history. But far beyond Earth, on worlds humanity had never seen, something unusual was happening. Questions were spreading. And questions once asked were difficult to silence. For millions of years, the empire had relied on one powerful belief: that it represented the highest form of civilization. Its traditions were sacred. Its systems were perfect. Its rulers possessed unmatched wisdom. Generations had grown up believing those ideas. Few had ever dared to challenge them. Then humanity appeared. And suddenly, younger generations throughout the empire saw something they had never expected. Another way. Not a perfect way. Not a superior way. Just a different way. And for many, that alone was revolutionary. Alien students returning from Earth brought stories home. They spoke about universities where teachers encouraged debate. They described scientists who admitted mistakes without shame. They talked about comedians who joked about politicians, famous people, and even themselves. Older citizens often reacted with horror, but younger listeners became fascinated. Some secretly watched human entertainment. Others studied human history. Many couldn't believe that a species so young had survived centuries of conflicts, disasters, and challenges, while constantly reinventing itself. To them, humanity seemed chaotic, but strangely alive. Compared to the Empire's endless routines, Earth felt unpredictable and exciting. This worried Imperial leaders, not because humans possessed stronger weapons, but because ideas were spreading faster than fleets ever could. The situation became even more uncomfortable when several prominent alien scholars openly praised human innovation. One respected historian shocked millions during a public lecture. Instead of repeating traditional teachings, he asked a simple question. When was the last time we created something truly new? The room fell silent. No one had heard such words from a scholar of his status. Clips of the speech spread everywhere. Some praised him. Others condemned him. Arguments erupted across countless worlds. Television programs held debates. Families argued during meals. Friends stopped speaking to one another. The Empire had experienced disagreements before, but never on this scale. And while these debates consumed the galaxy, people on Earth remained largely unaware. Most humans simply enjoyed meeting visitors from distant stars. Alien tourists became common. Restaurants introduced menus designed for different species. Musicians collaborated with performers from other worlds. Scientists worked together on research projects. Life went on. Yet beneath the surface, governments closely monitored the growing tensions inside the empire. Experts feared instability, not because they wanted conflict, but because uncertainty made everyone nervous. If the empire fractured, nobody knew what might happen. Some worlds demanded reforms. Others wanted strict control. Several noble families blamed Earth for everything. According to them, humans had poisoned younger generations with dangerous ideas. But even among the nobility, cracks were appearing. A few younger leaders secretly admired humanity. They had visited Earth. They had walked through cities filled with creativity. They had watched humans argue passionately about ideas. They had seen artists, engineers, and dreamers working together. And for the first time in their lives, they had asked themselves a frightening question. What if change wasn't something to fear? Meanwhile, another problem was growing. The empire's economy. For centuries, the system had functioned through ancient rules and traditions. It had survived because no one questioned it. But after exposure to human methods, many businesses began experimenting. Some companies adopted simpler systems inspired by Earth. The results surprised everyone. Productivity increased. Costs decreased. Customers were happier. Young entrepreneurs became excited. Old officials became furious. Several industries fought bitterly over whether reform should continue. Meetings that once ended quickly turned into endless arguments. Some sectors modernized. Others refused. Confusion spread everywhere. For the first time in living memory, the empire looked uncertain. Back on Earth, people watched these developments with mixed emotions. Some were concerned. Others were hopeful. Most simply hoped things would remain peaceful. Human leaders repeatedly reminded everyone that the goal was cooperation, not competition. And despite the growing tensions, Countless friendships had already formed between humans and alien visitors. Students exchanged messages. Scientists collaborated daily. Families hosted guests from other worlds. Many people refused to see the Empire as an enemy. They saw individuals, friends, colleagues, neighbors. That human attitude surprised many outsiders, because throughout history, the Empire had viewed civilizations as groups. Humans viewed them as people, and that difference mattered. One event in particular changed many minds. An Imperial cargo station suffered a serious systems failure. Transport routes stopped. Supplies became delayed. Panic spread among administrators. Normally, solving such a problem would require months of approvals and ceremonies. But a mixed team of humans and alien engineers volunteered to help. Working together, they solved the issue in less than a week. News reports celebrated the achievement. Ordinary citizens were amazed, not because humans had saved the station, but because the team had succeeded by ignoring unnecessary traditions. For many viewers, the message was clear. Change wasn't destruction. Change was improvement. And suddenly, reform movements gained momentum. Young citizens demanded updates. Scholars proposed new ideas. Military officers questioned ancient doctrines. Teachers encouraged creativity. The old system began shaking. Imperial leaders were overwhelmed. Some wanted reforms. Others demanded crackdowns. Many simply didn't know what to do. For millions of years, stability had seemed eternal. Now uncertainty surrounded everything. And then came the moment that historians would later describe as the beginning of the Great Debate. During a meeting broadcast across thousands of worlds, a young officer stood before senior commanders and asked a question nobody had dared speak aloud. If our ancestors were wise, wouldn't they want us to improve upon their work rather than worship it forever? The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. No one interrupted. No one moved. Billions watched. And then something remarkable happened. Another officer agreed. Then another. And another. Not everyone supported the idea. Many remained fiercely loyal to tradition. But for the first time, disagreement itself became visible. People realized they weren't alone. Questions that had once been whispered in secret were now spoken openly. Human psychologists studying the broadcasts noticed something interesting. Most reformers weren't angry. They weren't trying to destroy the empire. They loved their civilization. They simply wanted it to grow again. And strangely enough, many credited humanity. Not because humans had forced anything, but because Earth had shown them something they had forgotten. Progress. Back on Earth, ordinary people struggled to understand why everyone considered humans so special. To them, creativity was normal. Questioning ideas was normal. Laughing at mistakes was normal. Trying again after failure was normal. Humans had never viewed these things as extraordinary. Yet to countless beings across the galaxy, they appeared revolutionary. One elderly alien visitor summed it up perfectly during an interview. He admitted that, when the Empire first discovered Earth, he had expected primitive beings desperate for guidance. Instead, he found something completely unexpected. People who made mistakes. People who argued constantly. People who laughed too much. People who questioned everything. And somehow, it worked. His words spread across the galaxy. Millions related to them. Even some high-ranking officials privately admitted that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't military power. It was adaptability. Humans changed. Humans learned. Humans moved forward, no matter how difficult life became. And perhaps that frightened some leaders more than anything else. Because deep down they knew the truth. Empires could command fleets. They could control worlds. They could preserve traditions for millions of years. But they could not stop ideas. And ideas born from curiosity had already escaped. By then, the crisis had grown too large to ignore. Ancient alliances weakened. Political factions argued endlessly. Scholars challenged old beliefs. Young citizens demanded opportunities. Entire worlds debated their future. The oldest empire in existence had survived wars, disasters, and countless enemies. Yet now it faced something far more difficult. It faced itself. And while uncertainty spread throughout the stars, humanity continued doing what it had always done. Building, learning, laughing, helping, not because people believed they were superior, but because that was simply who they were. Without realizing it, the citizens of one small blue world had reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten long ago. That the future was not something to fear. It was something to create. And soon, even the rulers of the eternal galactic empire would have to decide. Cling to the past, or step forward into a future they no longer fully understood. A future where humanity would no longer be seen as inexperienced newcomers, but as partners, and perhaps teachers, though none of them could yet imagine just how much the galaxy itself was about to change by the time the third year after first contact arrived. The galaxy looked very different from the one that had first discovered Earth. The eternal galactic empire still existed. Its world still stretched across the stars. Its fleet still guarded trade routes and protected billions of citizens. But something had changed. The empire no longer stood frozen in time. And strangely enough, the first steps toward that change had come from the most unexpected place imaginable. A small blue world whose people laughed too much. Years earlier, imperial leaders had expected humanity to become students. Instead, both sides had become teachers. And no one had seen that coming. The debates that once divided the empire had not disappeared. Some worlds still resisted reforms. Many traditions remained deeply respected. Older generations still valued customs that had existed for millions of years. But gradually, a new understanding emerged. Preserving the past did not mean refusing the future. The two could exist together. And that realization changed everything. The first major reforms focused on science and education. Universities across the empire introduced new methods inspired by human creativity. Students were encouraged to ask questions. Research teams received more freedom. Young scientists were allowed to experiment without fearing punishment for failure. At first, progress was slow. Centuries of habits could not disappear overnight. But little by little, results appeared. New discoveries began increasing. Engineers developed improved systems. Medical technologies advanced. For the first time in ages, innovation had returned. And the excitement spread rapidly. Citizens who had once viewed change with fear slowly became curious. They saw benefits with their own eyes. Life became easier. Travel became faster. Communication improved. Businesses grew stronger. And perhaps most importantly, hope returned. Back on Earth, people watched these developments with pride. Not because humanity had won anything, but because cooperation was working. Scientists from different worlds worked side by side. Students exchanged ideas daily. Friendships formed across species. Entire generations grew up seeing alien visitors as something normal. Children no longer stared in surprise when they met travelers from distant systems. To them, the galaxy simply felt bigger than before. And much more interesting, human culture spread throughout the stars in ways nobody had predicted. Music became incredibly popular. Sports tournaments attracted millions of viewers. Books, movies, and art inspired audiences on worlds humanity had never heard of. But one thing confused alien societies more than anything else: human comedy. Even years later, many species still struggled to understand why humans found certain things funny. Yet curiosity eventually replaced confusion. Comedians from different worlds began collaborating. New forms of entertainment appeared. Laughter, something many civilizations had once treated as unimportant, became a bridge between cultures. One famous alien performer admitted during an interview that humans had taught him something his people had forgotten: that joy itself had value. His words touched millions. Meanwhile, joint exploration programs expanded. Human astronauts traveled farther than ever before. Alien crews visited Earth in increasing numbers. Together, they discovered strange worlds, mysterious stars, and ancient ruins left behind by civilizations even older than the Empire itself. And with every new discovery, one lesson became clearer: the universe was too large for any single species to understand alone. Cooperation was stronger than pride. Many former imperial officials slowly accepted this truth. Some even became strong supporters of reform. One elderly leader who had once opposed human influence publicly admitted his mistake. He confessed that when Earth was first discovered, he believed humans were reckless and immature. Instead, he found something remarkable: a civilization that wasn't afraid of being wrong. His speech became famous, not because it was dramatic, but because of one simple sentence: "We spent millions of years protecting what our ancestors built. Humanity reminded us that honoring them means continuing their journey, not ending it." The statement appeared in schools, museums, and public monuments across thousands of worlds. Historians later considered it one of the most important speeches in modern galactic history. But perhaps the greatest changes happened on Earth itself. First contact had transformed humanity. Nations that once competed constantly learned to cooperate more closely. Scientific progress accelerated. Poverty decreased in many regions. Energy systems improved. Medicine advanced. New industries created opportunities nobody had imagined. Humanity remained imperfect. People still argued. Disagreements still existed. Problems still appeared. But now humanity faced those challenges as part of something larger. Not just one planet, but one community among many. And despite all the incredible technology and knowledge shared between worlds, humans never lost what made them unique: their curiosity, their creativity, and their strange ability to laugh at almost anything. Alien visitors often found Earth both confusing and wonderful. No two cities felt exactly alike. People argued passionately over sports. Families gathered for celebrations. Musicians experimented with new sounds. Inventors dreamed up strange ideas. Children asked endless questions. Life was messy, unpredictable, and beautifully alive. Many visitors fell in love with that spirit. Some even chose to settle permanently on Earth. Entire neighborhoods became homes to beings from distant stars. Languages mixed. Cultures blended. New traditions were born. And over time, differences that once seemed impossible became ordinary. Years turned into decades. Then decades became generations. Eventually, people who had witnessed first contact grew old. Their stories became history lessons. Children listened with amazement when grandparents described the fear that had filled the world when the giant fleet first arrived. To younger generations, it seemed almost unbelievable. Why would anyone have been afraid? The answer was simple: because nobody had known what waited beyond the stars. They had expected conquerors. Instead, they found neighbors. Historians spent centuries studying those early years. Countless books were written. Movies were made. Museums displayed artifacts from the age of first contact. And nearly every historian reached the same conclusion. The most important event had not been the arrival of the fleet. It had been what happened afterward. Because the story was never about one civilization defeating another. No great war had decided the future. No giant battle had changed history. The greatest victory belonged to understanding, to curiosity, to friendship, and strangely enough, to humor. Future generations often laughed when they learned how the relationship between humanity and the Empire had begun. The mighty rulers of the galaxy had expected fear. They had expected obedience. They had expected admiration. Instead, they encountered a species that asked questions, offered suggestions, and occasionally laughed at absurd situations. At first, the Empire had viewed this as disrespect. Later, they understood something deeper. Humans weren't laughing because they hated anyone. They laughed because life itself was unpredictable. Because mistakes happened. Because perfection didn't exist. And because taking oneself too seriously often caused more problems than it solved. Over time, even many imperial citizens adopted this attitude. Entire cultures rediscovered joy. Artists flourished. Scientists experimented. Dreamers dreamed again. The oldest empire in existence had not collapsed. It had awakened. And humanity had awakened with it. Thousands of years later, travelers across the galaxy still visited Earth. Not because it possessed the biggest fleets. Not because it controlled the most territory. But because something special had started there. Something no machine could calculate. Something no empire could command. Hope. Visitors often stopped at a monument built near the place where the first diplomatic meeting had taken place. Millions came every year. Tourists, students, historians, and explorers. Engraved on the monument were words chosen jointly by humans and the reformed empire. Simple words, but words that perfectly captured what history had taught them. Fear divided us, curiosity united us. Nearby stood another inscription that always made visitors smile. It had been suggested by both human and alien children. And after much debate, everyone agreed it deserved a place beside the first. It read, "The day mankind met the Galactic Empire, the universe expected fear. Instead, it heard laughter. And according to historians, that laughter had changed the stars forever."